Today it's farm economics, and we're going to take a big bite off and talk about subsidies and grants. This is a big topic in our culture right now, especially in our communities, Adam. And we're going to dive right in and probably piss off everyone today.
Probably, yeah. Getting a little hot water. The subsidy talk. Where do we want to start?
Well,
It's
let's start with a couple of other things first, because I want to say that usually, like, for our audience listening, usually Adam and I talk a little bit about what exactly we're going to cover in these talks, and we haven't done that yet. So whatever Adam is going to say is a complete surprise to me. And I'm actually excited. I want to hear it. Also want to make sure people know where to find us and how we got here, what we're doing. So, Adam, you take the lead on that one.
I write on Substack. I have a newsletter called Farming Full Time there. Been doing it for about 2 years, and yeah, you can find me there. Just Google my name, I'll pop up.
And of course, if you're listening to this, whatever platform you're listening to this on, these links will be in the show notes. I'm Liz Reitzig. I write Raw Milk Mama on Substack. You can also find my podcast, the Nourishing Liberty podcast, on Substack, Spotify, all the places where you find podcasts. And we talk about our food systems and how we fit into them. Adam's a full-time farmer, as his blog says. I am a backyard grower, permaculture person. How do we say that? Permaculturist. And I work with a large number of small farms to help them grow their businesses and support local communities. And I work on the advocacy piece of it. Why do we always like say that last or forget to say that? Like, I'm a complete and total policy geek. That should be like front and center, but it's so there for me all the time that I guess it gets to be background sometimes. But anyway, one of my deepest passions is all that policy geekiness. And I'm going to bring that to this conversation, Adam. Surprise, surprise.
Maybe it comes last because it always gets forgotten.
Hmm.
I don't
Or
know.
it's just like talking about the air we breathe.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah. So, Adam, you're
Yeah,
on the way to the farm, and it's still a cold,
it
snowy,
is.
snowy.
Yeah, I just had a friend text me from North Dakota. It was 21 there on April, what is it, 29th? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what day it is. We've been planting and stuff, so we've been pretty busy lately. But we got a little rain delay yesterday, and now frozen ground again this morning. So
And
got
here
a
we're
little
gonna get
time to catch
83.
up with this.
We're gonna get
80?
83 today. Yep.
Yeah, we're gonna have 80s next weekend though, so it's gonna turn around.
Excellent.
Things are gonna grow. And I woke up to green grass this morning. Finally,
Isn't it amazing? Those first few days,
yeah,
the grass goes from brown to green.
yeah. It's just it's a new kind of energy. I love it.
Yep.
Yeah,
All right. So, subsidies and grants. Woo!
yeah.
It's a big, messy topic right now.
It is messy.
Really messy.
Yeah,
And I'm sure we
messy,
could talk
muddy.
for hours on this and only cover a fraction of it. So, whatever you
Yeah,
hear this morning or whenever you're listening to this is only a tiny piece of it.
yeah, and it's hard to even know where you stand on it because it's so muddy that some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's abused. I mean, there's just like everything else in agriculture, there's no simple answer or solution. Or I mean, the government's been trying to do this for subsidized farms for almost 100 years since the Great Depression or the start of the Great Depression, and it seems like every time they meddle, something gets messed up, and you don't see it till years later. And And here we are still talking about 100-year-old policies that kind of are still in effect today, some semblance of them.
Well, Adam, I think you nailed it in saying that uh, every time it's messy, right? There's no like one definitively right answer or wrong answer. And every time they try to fix something, something else gets broken.
Yeah, yeah. But you don't notice that it gets broken right away because you have politicians operating on 2 and 4 year election cycles, and farming in long term, it's 20 to 30 year cycles. So by the time you see the cracks, the problems with these things, the damage has already been done. And then it's too late to reverse them because once you get used to getting something from the government, it's a lot tougher to take that away from people. That's when people get upset. And so then we
Well,
try another policy and screw something else up, you know?
but that's so spot on, right? And that's one of the principles that I think you and I like fundamentally agree on, which is if the government can provide it, the government can take it away.
Absolutely, yeah.
And who has much say in that monolithic, institutional, systemic, structural design on our economy?
Right.
It's so hard. It's so hard to be a participant in that, or really it's quite hard to affect change.
It is, yeah. And and you're never gonna make everybody happy. You're always gonna piss somebody off with these policies. And I I don't know. It's so muddy. It's I'm not for or against farm subsidies. It just depends on what it is we're talking about. So I don't know. Do we want to talk about the history of how all this started first? Is
Of
that
course I
good?
do.
Yeah, it's probably a good place to start, I guess.
Yeah. And yet it does. It dates back actually just pre Great Depression. So in the late 1920s, it was under Hoover that he created the Farm Board. And
Right.
that was essentially, yeah, to help the prices of some of those commodity products. And how they did that was interesting because what they said was if you produce a lot of something, if you produce surplus cotton, I mean at that point it was basically cotton and wheat. Those are the main
Right.
products. The government will buy the extra from you. So what happened? It incentivized surpluses.
Yeah.
And
People that didn't nor- people that didn't normally grow wheat or cotton, all of a sudden, why don't we grow wheat or cotton? There's a safety net. Why not?
yeah. And also like when you look at the ecosystem, what it did was it de-incentivized or disincentivized diversity.
Right. Yeah.
So you can look at what was happening. Well, actually, what actually led up to that, right? That's a whole nother piece of the conversation. And a couple of the things that led up to that was the invention of the cotton gin, which made cotton processing so much more efficient. So they could
Mm.
grow more, process more, and it was being exported, of course. And okay, what happens to markets with supply and demand? You have an excess supply, prices drop, right? I mean, it makes
Mm-hmm.
so much sense what happened because the way I look at it from an ecosystem perspective, it was a natural or lowering of prices when you have less diversity. It's a natural response to, hey, we need more diversity, we need more choices, different types of food, different crops at different times, right?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, the market is the boss. I mean, and eventually it's going to punish anybody who tries to mess with it. I mean, and it's so weird that they. What's weird to me is that they didn't see that coming. Like, obviously, if you have excess wheat, the price of wheat's going to go down. And then not only did they do it in 1930, they did it again 50 years later in 1980 after they told everybody to plant fence row to fence row. They did the exact same thing, and then they paid. I used to work for a guy who had a bunch of grain bins and some sheds that were paid for by the government to store wheat, surplus wheat. It's like, I don't know, history repeats. We
It
don't learn,
does.
you
And of
know, like,
course, from that surplus, we also got the ridiculous food pyramid. Eat 11 servings of grain every day
yeah, yeah, that
because
too.
there was a surplus that they needed
Right.
to do something with.
Hmm.
So subsidies affect nutritional policies, affect farm economics. But Adam, let's go back also to the Great Depression because there was a lot
Sure.
going on at that time. And
Yeah.
I think we can all look at that and say, at that time, there was sheer panic. And I guess in a way, like if we want to relate it to anything, maybe we can relate it to the panic that happened around COVID and the financial crisis because so many people lost work. And I don't want to talk about the rightness or wrongness of any of that. That's not the point here. The point is to understand the panic, and that there was an attempt, I believe that there was an attempt under FDR's leadership to alleviate some of that panic. And so his Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 was intended to do some of that. And you're right, like some of the consequences of that were terrible.
Yeah, and I like to think they had good intentions, but isn't that the same year that they slaughtered six like millions of pigs? Well,
Yes.
people are starving in the streets and the price of pork collapsed. So to support the pork price, the idea was to slaughter the hogs to bring the pork price back, which it did. But they, I don't know, they had such a supply of pork they just wasted them. I mean, all this food wasted, and there's people starving. Like, how didn't they see that happen? How? How? I, it blows my mind. But like I said, I'm sure the intentions were good, maybe. I, but when you're doing stuff like that, how do you make that decision with good intent? I don't get it. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think some people actually really question those intentions. And
Right.
to be honest, I do too. I think for the most part, people, basic worker level people, have decent intentions. But I do
Yeah.
think that there is some manipulation going on behind the scenes with some people who maybe don't have good intentions, who maybe want to do land grabs. So they want to devalue or displace farmers so that that land can be bought up. Like, I think those intentions are also there.
Yeah,
And
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
I don't necessarily think they're good intentions. Sometimes they're just thoughtless, but those are a component of this entire ecosystem of
Yeah.
subsidies and grants and who gets them and who doesn't. There
Mhm.
are greed based intentions, even while a lot of
Oh
people.
yeah. Yeah, there's yeah, greed-based intention. There's a lot of abuse. I mean, prevent plant is a good example. So if we can't get our crop in by a certain date, call it June 20th, it's too late to plant wheat because the ground is too wet, we can just collect subsidized crop insurance for not planting that. Which I get that some years that does happen. I've seen it happen a few times in my life. But then on the other end of that, it incentivizes people to game the system and just say, well, it was too wet, I couldn't plant, even when it's perfect conditions, dry, all the neighbors have crops in around. But there's people around here that are known for just gaming that system. There's one guy that just got in trouble around here for like he wasn't even planting his whole field. He read the rules to these policies and figured out if I leave my planter up 30% of the time, I still qualify for crop insurance. So he was planting 70% of the field. And he did this for years, year after year after year, and he collected a check. But they finally went after him now, and he just lost it all this year. But I mean, this went on for a decade probably, and it's just so that's the negative side of it. The side that I hate is that it's so easy to abuse, and there's no checks and balances to it. So that's part of the reason we get a bad rap for it. But aside from cases like that, if there's a system set up that way, you're a fool not to take it, right?
Well,
Not game the system, but I mean when the situations are actually when they match what the policy says, when it's too wet to plant, we we need a backstop, I think.
yeah,
I don't
Adam,
know.
you're touching on the personal versus the system wide, right? And of
Yeah,
course there can always be corruption in any system, especially when
of
there's
course.
money involved, right? So I think it's
Yeah.
given that there's going to be corruption, and we can lump in what I was talking about with the intentions, the greed based intentions. That can be considered corruption, right? So
Hmm.
there's always going to be that. There's human beings involved, so that's going to happen. But I think the bigger question here and the bigger lens to look at is what do these subsidies or grants incentivize? And then I ask the question, I'll ask two questions from that, which is, um, how does it create a false economy? And then let's ask the bigger question of, what are people for? Because in the example of FDR and his implementation of the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933, which, by the way, was overturned by the Supreme Court in 1936, but reintroduced and became law a couple of years later, slightly modified. But with that, the the big farms that were losing, they got these subsidies to not plant, just like what you're talking about,
Yeah.
which made it so that farm workers no longer had work,
Right. Right.
and that
Knock on
became a
effects.
vicious cycle all by itself.
Yeah. And it also incentivized guys to put the productive land into conservation reserve and get paid for it. But they didn't just stop farming, they just went and farmed more marginal land because they could do it at a lower cost, collect payments on the good stuff, and it you're right, it creates a false economy. It props up land values, it can prop up grain prices, whatever way they try to do it, it creates an artificial economy, and it I don't know, it changes it from farming just to farm to chasing a system basically.
Yeah.
And we're just at the whims of basically whatever the government tells us to do in a way.
In a way, absolutely. On the individual level, right? On
Yeah.
the farm level. And
Yeah.
then let me tell you a couple of stories, and we can talk about this for a little bit, because the whole grant ecosystem, and I'm using the term ecosystem just because I don't even know what else to call it, but let's say the grant economy, where certain things, and I want to use examples on the small farm scene because that's what I'm more familiar with. But certain things are considered grant worthy in different places by different entities, right? Everything from USDA to state level grants down to privately funded grants. And in that regard, here's what I'm seeing. And tell me what you're seeing. Tell me what you see that I'm missing. But for example, farms, the USDA had several layers and levels of grants for farms that wanted to implement solar. And so when you're a farmer and you're like, oh, I can put solar on my land, and somebody else is going to pay for it, it does two things. It artificially inflates that cost of solar, the price, right? Because, oh,
Right.
hey, I don't have to pay for it. So the solar companies can basically do whatever they want with those prices. It's getting funded by grants. And then on the farm level, it's like, if that's not valuable enough to actually save for and pay for, is it valuable? I mean, yes, but, right? There's so many buts to that. Um, or yes, and then another thing is that, so here I'm going to give an actual real life example. Here, in my area, there's a small farm that's flashy and really, really beautiful and doing so many things that are right in line with the modern talking points, and um, very popular, big on social media, all the whole nine yards. And they've got a certain price for their produce and their products. And then there are other small farms, and they're funded by a large number of grants.
Sure.
And then there's other farms that are not, whether through their own personal ethics, they don't, or through not being able to, they're not. And they have to sell their products at a price that still works for them, but they're trying to compete with farms like this other one that can sell at a much reduced price on some things because they're funded by grants. It's just, it creates this, like one farm put it to me, a truly false economy.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes it, yeah, a totally unlevel playing field. Like, that sucks. I didn't know that. Hmm.
Yeah, it's happening. And then people will say, "Oh, but wouldn't you rather the small farms get the money instead of the DOD?" Yes, of course. Yes, like yes, of course. But
Yeah.
is it an either or? The DOD is going to get funded no matter what. And what can we do to help diversify and really help support small farms so that they're not relying on grants and they're not creating this false economy?
Huh. That's really interesting. I never even thought of that. I haven't worked much with grants, but I've been looking into it. There are, on a larger scale, we have there's a program called Equip, which is one of the subsidies that it actually has. Oh, sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. It has good incentives anyway. Equip is about reducing fertilizer. The government will pay you to reduce fertilizer, buffer strips, cover crop, no till, things like that. And one of the things I was looking into, I'd like to start strip tilling, basically doing a little, instead of going out and doing full tillage and blackening the soil, I just want to do a little strip this wide, till that, and leave the rest of the soil undisturbed. Saves fuel, better for the ground, all these things. But the problem is the equipment. It's a $500,000 for one machine to do this. Well, good grief. So I've looked into these grants, but now everything is frozen. So we're just kind of we've signed up for some of these things, but now you're just in limbo. We don't even know what's happening. So it's a struggle on our end too. And and to compare to, well, your comparison of the nice farm versus the other, I think this stuff is available to all of us, but I think very few are willing to go through the work to get it. At least from what I see on our scale, there's not a lot of people signed up for these programs because there's a lot involved. It's, it's government. It's stacks of paper this big. It's kind of confusing. And so they make it tough to access, but not impossible. But I wonder why that one farm is able to get the grants and the other one isn't. They've tried, I assume, right?
Well, I think we're talking about, well, we can split this into two different things. So one is you're right, like it's a whole stack of government paperwork. And one of the things that I think about is how that takes its own skill set.
Yeah. Yeah.
Applying for grants, knowing that whole system, that whole process, applying for getting it, that's a whole other skill set. And it's one that I'll just go ahead and say, like, maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but the way I observe things in the situations I see, the younger generations are usually more adept at those things. So it kind of displaces some of the older farmers just by virtue of that they don't understand the process. They don't understand the language that's being
Sure.
for. And so that's a discrepancy right there. And then the other thing is the farm, some farms actually ethically do not want to apply for and use grants.
Sure. I get that.
And so in the example I used, the farm that's not getting grants, they have an ethical position on that. And I
Sure.
respect that. I mean, I really respect that on a personal level and on more of a systemic level. Because as you're saying, like that piece of equipment you need, to me that seems like a replay of what happened after the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And some of the equipment was subsidized, which meant that uh, perhaps I'm not as much of an economist to say this definitively, but those who sell the equipment can then artificially inflate those prices because you're not paying for it anyway.
Yeah.
The
that's
endless
actually
charges.
that's actually happening right now. So I trade stocks sometimes. And John Deere stock has been a thorn in my side since 2013. I started shorting it, betting against John Deere stock, thinking it would go down because of the 1980. I look back at the 1980s farm crisis. Farmers can't buy tractors. John Deere's toast, right? Their share value is going to go down in theory. So I thought that was going to happen again. What happened? I got steamrolled, got my face ripped off in the trade. It's done nothing but go up in 10 years, and it's still near all time highs, even with all this tariff talk and all the things going on in the farm economy, farmers can't buy tractors, but their prices keep going up. They're unaffordable. But what did they do? They switched to leasing. So farmers just lease now. So basically, John Deere sells the tractor to itself and a farmer leases it. So it counts as a sale for John Deere and it inflates their stock price. Their company is doing great. It just ties onto that artificial economy we talked about. Everything is propped up all the way down to the equipment manufacturers. It's there's just so many unintended consequences from all these things that sorry,
Yeah.
I get a little worked up about John Deere stock. I just beside myself about the thing. Does
Well,
not go down.
it's a great microcosm, right?
It is. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
perfect example of what's wrong with this system. So
Yeah.
let me read off a couple comments real quick. So Cat Warrior says, "How do you think government should or shouldn't be giving subsidies? I don't see the benefits of pretty much anything subsidized by government." On a system level, I would say I have to agree with that on the system level. And on the personal level, I mean, I'm not going to say like don't take a subsidy if that's what's going to save your farm, if that's what's going to pay your mortgage for the next year. So I think we have to separate the fact that like on the system level, there's it's so messy, right? And muddy. And like you're saying,
Yeah.
it's causing so many problems. And on the personal level, like a struggling like farmer who's about to lose their farm is not going to not take the subsidy.
No.
And
What else is he gonna do?
yeah, but on the policy wide level, we have to like I mean honestly, Adam, like yes, number 1, we have to fix it. Number 2, we're not going to. Like
No.
it's not going to fix. We're going to collapse. Things are going to get really 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 messy. That's what I see anyway. Um
Yeah.
but but also when we collapse what's going to happen because that's what happened in the 1930s, right? 29, 30, the depression, the dust bowl, that was effectively a collapse and what happened? That's when all of this really started.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're entering that crisis phase, the unraveling. And I think you're right. I think it is gonna blow up. And maybe we're seeing it. I mean, we have a government that is going after wasteful spending. I mean, all this stuff is gonna get looked at. Everything is on the chopping block, in my opinion. But I guess personally, at least when I was younger, I called myself a libertarian, and I would love to see a world that didn't require farm subsidies. I really would. I'd love to see the market work freely. But if that's going to happen, and especially if we're going back to a protectionist policy where we're not going to export our things to the world, we're going to raise prices on it so less people around the world are going to buy our products. Well, we farm way too much land to feed just America. So for that to happen, you're talking about a complete system meltdown, a complete blow up. And and maybe it'll happen whether we want it to or not, but there's a lot of pain involved in that. There's a lot of lives that'll be displaced. There's I don't even know. It would be ugly. Like you said, it would be nasty. Maybe it will be. I don't know.
Yeah, Adam,
To write the rules.
your connection's glitching just a little bit.
Oh no. Well, I was just saying, is it back now?
Yes.
I'm just saying on the other side of that, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. The other side of that is great because we get to write the rules and we get to design it the way the people actually want again. But I don't think that happens until it all blows up and crumbles down, unfortunately.
That's the conclusion I keep coming to also.
Yeah. It's
It does sound doom and gloom, but I agree with you. There's also a silver lining to that, maybe.
yeah.
And I agree with you also. Like I don't want to see collapse and lots of people suffer. That's what I hope we can prevent. And
Right.
and I think ultimately on the individual level, it is our responsibility to do whatever we can to improve our local food security.
Yeah. And I think that's happening. There's an appetite to do this. And I talked about it last week that young people want to farm. They care about where their food comes from. And that part of it is just it's happening with demographics and it's kind of beyond it's bigger than us. And that'll be some of it. But yeah, in the meantime, there's a lot of things that would have to change, and there's a lot of money flowing into Washington. There's a lot of farm lobbying. I mean, especially sugar industry. My God, the money spent on that. That's one of the biggest subsidies in agriculture is the sugar industry. I'm gonna get myself in trouble here, right? If I wind up dead in a ditch somewhere, you know where to find me. Somewhere in
No, no.
rural Minnesota.
I think there are lots of other people higher on the list than you for that.
Yeah, I guess I'm not that important.
Well, but I know. I mean, but it does it knowing how corrupt things are does require a certain amount of caution in what we discuss and when and how.
Yeah,
That's discernment and wisdom. but
yeah,
but you're right. And that oh gosh, like just that one statement of the sugar lobby, I'm like, I want to go off in so many different directions and pull on so many threads on that. But there's a lot of power there. There's so much corruption with how money gets allocated, right? And another question that came up, Rooster was asking about, well, if farmers are paid to not grow, couldn't somebody game the system and just become wealthy by not growing? Yes, yes, that is happening.
yeah, yeah.
that happens.
There's plenty of people that know how to take advantage of that. Yeah,
hmm
yeah. Yeah, they've tried so many variations of it. I think in the '70s they paid farmers to leave land fallow for a year just to take some out of production. They've messed with peanut quotas. The government regulated how many peanuts people could grow and who got to grow them until 2002. And that's basically how the sugar industry works too. They tell the sugar processors you can produce this much, and it artificially inflates the price of sugar in America. Our sugar is 2 times more expensive than sugar anywhere else in the world. And then the worst part of it is, oh man,
Adam,
I'm really gonna.
can you give a little bit more detail on that? Are you talking about the sugar beets that the farmers sell or the price that we
That's
consumers are paying
that's
for sugar?
that's one of them. But sugar cane producers in Florida too, they're all under the same system. Um, but yeah, it's basically a way to prop up the price of sugar to support all of us, sugar beet farmers, sugar cane farmers, and I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but it creates another false market basically where we could, Mexico produces sugar at half the price. Doesn't it make sense to import that? But we don't because we slap a ginormous tariff on it to keep our price elevated. And it's really interesting now because we have an administration, especially Kennedy, is you just said the other day, sugar is poison and we're subsidizing it. Another farmer told me that. Like, you believe that? They said sugar's poison. I'm like, well, it kind of is, and I've always had a moral dilemma about that, like raising sugar, and obesity is a massive, massive problem in this country, and we're subsidized for it. So I don't know, more false economies, more unintended consequences, if you will. But the point is that that's not even safe anymore, I don't think. I mean, they're gutting all sorts of stuff. Who's to say that's going to be in the next farm bill? Probably will. Like there's a lot of lobbying money behind it, the cartel.
It's interesting that uh, what that makes me think of is do we really think that consumer advice is going to change on a product that's been that heavily invested by our the other side of our institutions, shall we say? Can we really can will the sugar like okay, industry lobby, I don't even know what term to use here, but will that with that being so heavily subsidized, is there ever going to be straightforward messaging about the consumer side of it? And hey, oh my gosh, Adam, this means we can open up a whole nother can of worms that I love to talk about, which is like let's compare it to tobacco in the 80s,
Same,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And we had so much infrastructure built around tobacco production and incentivized, well, especially okay, in Maryland, here where I'm from in Maryland, it was tobacco was our crop, big time. It was
sure.
our crop. And I grew up, everywhere you drive, that's not the city, right? But everywhere you drive, there's the big tobacco barns. You drive around in the summer, there's always tobacco hanging. Like it was just part of our world, part of our ecosystem. And just taking that little microcosm on subsidies and grants and what it looks like now, guess what? Okay, now in the 80s and the 90s, smoking is so dangerous, it's bad for your health. What are we going to do with that land? What are we going to do with those farmers? Well, guess what? Maryland decided, and I honestly don't know how much of this was USDA versus Maryland, but basically all of that land is now in wineries.
Yeah.
You just prop up another industry, right? So it just
Yeah.
goes from like propping up one industry down to another, up to another.
And they paid them not to farm tobacco on it too. I just read somewhere last night. They paid them not to farm tobacco on it. So they got paid on that land, and then they went out and just rented another farm and grew tobacco on that. So there was still basically government supported tobacco even after there was government supported tobacco, just inadvertently.
So let's not talk about the other addictive crop that gets grown everywhere right now. That's too much of a can of worms for this this conversation. But let's bring it back to diversifying and what that might look like,
Yeah.
because
Let's.
ultimately that's the solution.
It is, yeah. But you have to have enough people willing to do it to make it work, don't you? I
Yes.
mean, it's the roots run so deep in all of this. It's hard. You can't just. Well, they tried it in 1996 to wean farmers off of subsidies. That lasted about 5 minutes before it blew up. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it takes to change. I think it's a population with enough interest to do this and to rewrite the rules. And then again, I always go back to the GLP-1 drugs, the Ozempics and the shots people take. That's driving people's appetite for nutrition, where sugar isn't going to have as much demand moving forward. If people can lose weight and be healthier and their bodies crave non-sugar, they crave protein, nutrient-dense foods. That's just another large force pushing us in that direction that you're talking about, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know if I can speak to that because I don't know how widespread that is. But I think it does tie into the subsidy conversation because if I understand from the little bit I've read about that class of drugs is that they are subsidized,
Of
right?
course they are. Yeah.
So it's subsidizing and incentivizing that behavior, and how does that impact this behavior over here, which is what's going on with our farms, our farmers, our farm subsidies, that whole messy ball of yarn.
Yeah. Can I talk about tariffs for a little bit?
Yes, please. Let's talk about those.
Speaking about creating false markets. So I was thinking back to the first Trump administration, the first trade war, basically crushed the price of soybeans in America, destroyed the global market, basically. And what happened in the end of that? Farmers got a payment, bailed out for, I think it was called market facilitation program, right? So they get a bailout, subsidized, basically a direct payment. So what was the point of all that? And now here we are doing it again. And now it's interesting. The farmers I talk to, you think they'd be nervous about tariffs and the soybean and corn prices where they are, but nobody's even nervous now. They're just like, I'll get a check. What's the big deal? You just got to stomach it for a little bit. So that's how fast, I guess the point of that is that's how fast farmers get trained, or people in general get trained that if there's a backstop, I can do whatever I want. It's
Okay, can you walk me through a couple details of that? And maybe I'm missing.
sure.
So 5, 6 years ago, 7
Yeah,
years,
20. Yep.
uh, in the first trade war from Trump's first administration, the
Yep.
tariffs on soybeans meant that our farmers could not export them.
Yeah, it just made our soybeans more expensive on the world market. So
Oh, so
basically,
okay.
China was a long time buyer of our soybeans, and that's kind of when that shifted. And now most of what they buy is from Brazil,
Okay.
which drove
Because of that,
because of
the
that our
price
supply was
dropped.
higher,
Right. The price
drove
dropped.
the price of soybeans down. Yep. And then to make up for that, all the money that we lost as farmers, they sent a direct check out to farmers to backstop that essentially.
The USDA did.
The well, Trump administration sent a direct payment to farmers. Market facilitation program. That's I don't know. Basically hush money, I guess, for a broken trade policy. But now I guess the point is we're doing it again, and now we just most guys just expect the payment is going to come, and I think it will, because that's an important vote, for
Did that
Republicans
lead
essentially.
to lower soybean production the following 5, 6 years?
Marginally, I believe. I don't know the numbers for sure, but it did drop soybean production somewhat. But I mean, we still grow a ton of them.
Yeah.
Still grow 83. I think it's 83 million acres this year, if I remember right. But not enough to really make a difference, because again, why not plant them anyway? If there's a check on the back end, guys are going to do it, right? What really bugs me about all this is that the blame always rolls downhill. It always rolls downhill to us. We're the ones that get shit on about all these subsidies. We didn't create these programs, but we're the ones that always takes the heat for them. That's that's what really grinds my gears about it.
Well, I agree with you. It's like asking, I mean, it's an, how to put it? It is insurmountable. It's not a realistic ask to ask commodity farmers to stop taking subsidies and crop insurance. And we're
Right.
using those two terms as we're saying subsidies, but that includes crop insurance. Like if something
Yeah.
when bad weather happens and you don't get to plant your crop, that's considered crop insurance. And but you're right. Like the blame is put on the farmers taking the subsidies when it's realistically what most humans would do, caught in
Yeah,
this
just
horrible system.
yeah, you mentioned COVID earlier. Every industry got COVID bailouts. How many people took free COVID money and didn't pay it back? I mean, it's easy to point your finger when you're not the one receiving the subsidy money, but when you have the option to take the check, 99 people out of 100 are going to take it, right?
Yeah, I would say 999 out of 1,000
Yeah,
or
yeah, I would
more.
agree with you.
Yeah.
But the shitty part is most of us just want to farm, but we're trapped inside this system that we didn't even design. We're just navigating just trying to keep it between the lines. That's what's difficult about it.
Yeah, and let's look at numbers again. Let's rewind to history because back when the USDA was first implemented under Lincoln, 50% of Americans were farmers.
All right. Yeah.
And so that's why it was called the People's Agency or the People's, whatever it was. And now, we talk about this all the time. It's approximately 1 to 1.5% of
Yep.
Americans are actual farmers now. And that's a huge difference. So that means that you're right, Adam. And we can kind of see this. I mean, if you look at some of the numbers in the graphs, you see just the downward trend of farming and agriculture in the US, but you can also see how it's directly related to the implementation of, well, Hoover's Farm Board and incentivizing not growing. What are landowners going to do with all that farmland? Well, they're going to stop farming it, right? And the the impact it's having, how all of these policies shift that down consistently.
Huh. You kind of lost connection a little bit, so there was a gap there.
Oh, well, I'm just going on about how policy and the policy to subsidize and incentivize not planting creates a world of fewer farmers.
Right. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does.
Okay, here's a question for you, Adam. So Rooster says, it's really interesting. And how do terminal seeds affect the markets? And I think that's a good one for you because you have a seed company as well as being a farmer, and you can speak to some of that and give us the 1, 2, 3 on that.
What affect what markets? Like, could you be more specific on the question?
Yeah. uh, If you can hear this, go ahead and type something in there. But I'm going to extrapolate and say probably related to what we're talking about because farms are subsidized a lot for GMO crops, which are terminal seeds. And also, when I think of this, Adam, I think of, oh gosh, this is like a whole nother tangent. I hope it doesn't get too crazy. But in the world of permaculture, we have ways of explaining things and talking about things. And one of them is the concept of many different types of capital that go into our systems. It's not just financial capital. And one of those types of capital is called living capital. And it explains the natural world and how if I have a bull and a cow, and the next year I have a bull and a cow and a calf, and how that leads to wealth and quality of life without it being financial capital. It's it's called living capital. And so the oak tree in my field could be the same thing. But terminal seeds, and that means seeds that do not produce a plant that produces more seeds, they impact a farmer's ability to continue that natural cycle.
Sure. I mean, not all of our seeds are terminal. Our wheat we grow and we regrow and regrow for years, as long as it's not patent protected by Bayers of the world or those guys. So not all of our seeds are that way, but I guess how does it affect the markets? Well, it drives up the price of seed a lot. It makes it that much more expensive to farm, so it affects it that way.
Okay, so Rooster
Um,
says actually he was thinking about Brazil versus US markets, not planting for a season and taking subsidies. Okay. So how would that impact the bigger picture that we're talking about with supply and demand when a farm
if
like,
if we didn't plan for a season, or if Brazil didn't plan for a season,
well, if we don't plant for a season and farmers get subsidies,
sure.
how does that impact the export market? Maybe what he's asking is Brazil versus US. Like you were saying, China
Um,
is getting soybeans now from Brazil because our farmers were incentivized to not plant.
well, that's part of it, but it's also just because they're cheaper out of Brazil or South America. They can produce soybeans much cheaper than we can. They have cheaper land, they have cheaper labor, cheaper machinery. So that's probably the bigger reason why China buys them over us. I would think. Makes sense to me anyway.
So that might have less to do with the terminal seeds and more to do with larger economic inputs.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's just basic supply and demand and price. They have pricing power over us. I think would be the biggest driver of that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. How did Brazil get involved in soybeans specifically? I really don't know how that started. I don't know much of the history behind it, but the growth they've experienced is astounding. And they're saying they're going to eat our lunch. Like I don't even know how much of a market there will be for soybeans in a few years in America. I mean, especially if we have tariffs restricting the export of them. I mean, things are going to change quickly. And yeah, we might get a payment to support us, but that still doesn't stop the other effects of it from happening. I mean, eventually things have to change, right? Wouldn't you think?
Well, things are always changing, whether we want them to or not. and
Right. Yeah.
and that I think is, the example I used earlier of like in Maryland, all the tobacco farms, well, there's no more money in tobacco, so they get grants and now they're all doing wineries. What's the impact of that? Are advertisements for and incentivizing more alcohol, right?
Yeah. And then
So
pretty soon too much wine is produced. And it's like that. I can't remember what country it was in the EU. They had wine lakes basically because I wrote it down somewhere. I don't know if it was France or where it was, but the government was subsidizing wine basically, overproduction, and then pretty soon they were dumping wine in lakes because they had nowhere to put it and nobody would buy it. So this
Yeah,
is
and
not just a U.S. thing. Subsidies around the world are there's all
it,
kinds of examples of these things.
all right, here's a thought-provoking question. Ready?
Yeah,
I'm gonna ask you to take a stab at this first, and then maybe I will. What's a realistic way to break that cycle of needing to be subsidized? Does it become self generating after a while, but can be changed, like the voting process or something else? I get taking the check, but there's a point in the cycle where collective choice, but um, is there a point in that cycle where collective choice can break it in a sustainable way for the farmers? Woo, that is the big $60 million question, isn't it? You take a stab at it, Adam.
I don't think so. Not without a lot of pain for a lot of people, and you have to have enough people willing to do it. But yeah, there probably is a point where it breaks. Where that is, your guess is as good as mine. But have you ever heard of reverse lifestyle creep?
Have I heard of that?
Yeah.
I've heard of it might be the same concept. Tell me if it's the same. That if you voluntarily lower your standard of living, your quality of life improves. Same kind of concept?
A little before that actually. So lifestyle creep is when, typically you start a career and you slowly make more and more money and your lifestyle improves, but it improves so slow that you really don't notice it. Well, if you
Oh,
go broke, it usually happens pretty fast. They call it reverse lifestyle creep, where you have to go backwards from where you were back to where you started really, really quickly. And trust me from experience, it's really hard to do reverse lifestyle creep. It punches you in the face. Basically, what I'm saying is to go through a change that a lot of us would like to see, you're asking a lot of people to go through that reverse lifestyle creep to basically go broke for a little bit and start all over or find something else to do or figure out a new career path or a new thing to farm or whatever it is. You're asking people to basically overturn their lives and dump them on their heads. And to get people to willingly do that, I don't see it happening, I guess, but maybe I'm just a negative Nancy. I don't know. Does that make sense?
it totally makes sense. And
Okay, good.
I'm just thinking about this question and your answer, and in terms of what I know about human nature, is there a realistic way to break that cycle of needing to be subsidized? Um, no, no, because the work, Adam, the work that you and I do and the work that I've been doing for 20 years is all about finding and supporting the local growers and changing policy. And I'm going to say there's not enough interest. People do not care. Like Americans don't care. They want
Right.
their cheap food, they want Dollar General, they want to be able to get whatever they want to get whenever they want to get it, not care about seasonality, not care about showing up at the farmer's market, even if it means they have to get up a little bit earlier, not care about buying from a local buying club if they have to think about it. They just want what they want when they want it. And
Yeah.
that to create a change of that magnitude, it's not going to happen on the policy level. There's way too much corruption and not enough people care to modify that corruption. And I honestly think it's not going to happen until we have some kind of bottom drop out. And it's going to be a crisis. It's a lot of people are going to be in pain, but often it takes that kind of pain for serious change to happen.
Yeah. That's how every massive structural change in history has happened, usually through pain, through famine, depression, war, something like that. There I go, doom and gloom again.
And it sounds like it, but I don't think it is. And
No, because the other side of it, I'm very optimistic. I think the rules will get rewritten. There will be a new order, And I think a lot of this stuff will go away, and we'll see the error of a lot of these things. And but yeah, you can't avoid the pain ever. It's life. That's human nature, like you said. It's people don't change unless they have to, until they're forced to. It's no different here.
Yeah, and that, we talked about this a couple episodes ago where we talked about apocalyptimist. And
Right.
that's somebody who sees the apocalypse happening, but we're optimistic about the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the same one who asked that question says, yeah, consumers need to get hit with the farmers. And if that happens, I'm wondering what the solution or new rules would be. Yeah, to both of that. I think we're all wondering
Yeah.
what the new rules would be. And I'd like to see it return to something that honors our natural law, and that we could have more land in its natural state, and that is unmanaged.
Sure.
I don't think that's very likely, though, not with the kind of industries we have around us.
Possible though. I mean, look, like we said, we farm way too much farmland. So if the market goes a different way, if people change their food choices and get over their cheap food and want to do it themselves, yeah, maybe it could change. Maybe a lot of this could go back to its natural way. I don't I don't think it's likely, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
How, how's that for optimism?
It's great, and also the level of, you said earlier, your younger self would have called you a libertarian. Same boat. I
Yeah.
identified with that for a little while, but I think it's the
Yeah.
principles that matter. And so, in that vein, ultimately, your food security is your responsibility.
Right. Right.
And so, you want to get through it. You want to get through whatever messiness is going to happen for the next 5 to 10 to 50 years, then take responsibility for your food security and for
Learn how to
taking
grow
care of the
food.
land under your feet.
Yeah. 100%.
And by
Learn
the way,
how to grow. Go
I'm
ahead.
reading that book, The Fourth
Fourth
Turning.
turning. Yeah.
I'm not very far in, but it's got so many good points, and talking about the structure of generations and how those generations impact and cycle, right? So
It'll
it makes
it
so much
it'll
sense
blow
that
your
we're in that crisis right now.
yeah, it'll blow your mind, the parallels he makes in that book. It
Yes.
changed the way I think about a lot of things. But now I need to reread it because you're rereading it. I feel like I better brush up on it. So I'll put the audiobook in when I get back in the tractor in a couple of days.
Okay, so Samantha, she says maybe government could subsidize alternative methods of ag.
Yeah.
We need the corporations out of agriculture. Yes, we do need the corporations out
Well,
of agriculture.
for that to happen, we need corporations out of government too. That's I think it was oh man, I've got a guy here to get some seed. I have to cut you short, Liz.
Yeah, well, we're at the tail end anyway. We've been on here for an hour. So, any final thoughts? And Adam, make sure you share where people find you and any other little
Yeah,
details.
I just like the idea of learning how to grow your own food. I'm actually going to learn more about growing my own food this summer. Sherry and I are going to put a garden in. But
Awesome.
yeah, um, but yeah, I can be found on Substack, Adam Kuzna, farming full time. Um, I try to write weekly. I'm a little behind lately. I've been extremely busy and haven't had a lot of time for it, but I will be getting back to it soon. So
But
yeah,
we've been
you can
doing
find
these
me there.
updates, so they can follow you that way too.
Yeah, it at least gives me a chance to check in, let people know I'm still alive.
Exactly. Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Adam. And of course, Raw Milk Mama on Substack and Nourishing Liberty podcast. And Adam, thanks for all you do.
Alrighty,
Keeping it
thank you.
going.
You as well.
All righty. We'll catch you all
All right.
next week. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Take care.